One day, Thomas was resting at Nafford Junction when Sir Topham Hatt told him he had to collect some lead from the lead mines. So Thomas went off to the lead mines. To make up for lost time, he decided to go very fast, which would be helpful. The lead mines were all the way near the end of the Farquhar branch, which is Thomas's branch line. So Thomas was very happy that he got to travel along his branch line to get to the lead mines. Then there was trouble. As Thomas rounded the bend and was coming down towards the hill, his brakes had failed. Thomas couldn't slow down. By the time Thomas's brakes were turned on, I overshot at that. Anyways, by the time Thomas's brakes were turned on, it was too late. The old mine could not handle the weight of engines, and the mine collapsed. Thomas had fallen into the mine. Sir Topham Hatt was sitting on a bench waiting for his train when he heard the news. Luckily, Edward was resting in the junction after pulling a passenger train. So Topham Hatt told Edward to go help Thomas. Edward happily agreed and set off. After Sir Topham Hatt watched Edward left, he now had to figure out who was going to pull Thomas's freight train. Well, that's a story for another day. Edward raced along the line towards the old mine. Soon, Edward had arrived, which was almost at Thomas's accident. The driver lowered Edward's speed a bit. Edward was coupled up to Thomas, and it was now gonna pull Thomas out. It was a lot harder than Edward thought. But at last Thomas was free from the mine, but with a low derailed. Thomas was thankful that Edward pulled him out of the mine, but Thomas's front was badly bent. So Edward Edward helped Thomas to the works, and the two engines puffed home. The two engines made it back to Knapford, where Sir Topham Hatt was waiting for them. Well done, Edward. You were a very useful engine for rescuing Thomas. Now, Thomas, I'll let Edward help you back to the works. The two engines soon left Knapford and were now heading to the works. Soon, the two engines had made it to the big station, aka Tidmouth. The two engines had made it to the works. Edward gently shunted his friend in. Hold on. Coupling issue. Edward left Thomas at the works and went back to Knapford because Thomas told Edward if he was getting repaired, who would pull his freight train. So Edward went to Knapford to go ask Sir Topham Hatt. Edward had arrived at Knapford and puffed into the station, where Sir Topham Hatt was. Edward, "Sir, if Thomas is at the works, who's going to pull his freight train?" Sir Topham Hatt, "Well, the only available option I have is James, but he won't like that, but a really useful engine has to do what they are told." Edward, "All right." Edward decided to sleep in the siding at Knapford Junction. The next day, when James heard the news, he was very cross. He said to himself, "Of course, Thomas falls in a mine, and it's my job to take his freight train. Why can't Edward do it? Edward is Thomas's friend, of course." But anyways, he went to Tidmouth, where Thomas's train was. Unfortunately, Thomas couldn't take it because he was still going under repairs after his accident from yesterday. If you're wondering why James's cab roof is fully red, this Roblox game is based off of the Railway series. So it's one of James's illustrations from the books where his cab is fully red. If you were curious. Thomas's train wasn't waiting in the siding because James was in a bad mood. He bumped the cars hard. The troublesome trucks did not like this and were determined to get James back. Stuck in the tender. And that's why you don't run into things, otherwise you'll spin out. As you saw in that low moment when I was going to respawn more cars. The last 4 troublesome trucks were loaded with lead. Now James would be able to take Thomas's freight train to the docks. After coupling up to the last few freight cars, James was coupled up to the train, and off he left. Oh yeah, I forgot, the trains in this game, I believe, had, like, the real-life whistles of their real-life bases, or the whistle from the books. James angrily puffed out of Tidmouth Yard, now ready for his long journey to the harbor. even though the lead is usually light, in this case, because there were a lot of freight cars, it was making James go a little more slower than usual. James was just going to be happy to deliver Thomas's freight train. So far, the journey was going pretty smooth. No accidents or incidences or anything. That was just because the trucks were waiting for their plan. James whistled so loud it woke up Edward. He was still asleep. Now James was puffing along the Farquhar branch line because that's where the harbor was. Even though James was a mixed traffic engine, which means can pull passengers and freight, James only preferred to pull passengers. He didn't like pulling freight trains. James would just be happy that he'll be able to pull his passenger train after he delivered Thomas's freight train. The trucks whispered. Once he reaches the end of the hill, that's when we'll push him down the hill. Unfortunately for James, he was too angry. He was not paying attention to the trucks because he was too busy being cross. Then came the real test. The steep hill that was on the Farquhar branch. James put every ounce of steam he had The freight cars were trying to hold James back, but James didn't care. He kept on moving up the hill and made it to the top. Aha! I've done it! I've made it up! I made it up the hill! James said happily. Now time for a plan, said the trucks. Go faster, go faster. And banging their buffers, they pushed James down the hill. Once James had realized the trucks' plan, He knew he would not be able to stop. James put every ounce of steam and weight to hold the cars back and tried to stop, but it was no use. James kept on rolling down the track. The guard in the brake van was trying to slow down James, but to no avail. James remembered that the buffers at the harbor were Oh, that's cool. Hold on. I just figured out if you press the whistle on James, you can change his skins. You can have James's blue lining or his Adventure Begins skin. But we're gonna stay with classic red and the black lining, just like how James is in the show. But James remembered the buffers at the harbor were not secured properly, so if James couldn't stop in time, he would run right through the buffers. The end of the line was approaching faster and faster. The driver applied the brakes. But James was still moving. The driver applied the emergency brakes, but it was too late. James hit the buffers and fell right into the water. "Bust my buffers," said James. "I'm sunk." And he was. If only I didn't shunt the cars so roughly. James would now have to wait for a while. Somehow the buffers were still on the track, even though James bumped into them. The freight cars were very pleased with themselves. Sir Topham Hatt was at the station where James crashed and saw what happened. So he went to the station to tell the Tidmouth station, which is pretty much the Nafford station in the railway series, because Tidmouth station has the same design as Nafford station, because Tidmouth was meant to be the big station in the books, but in the TV series, like the model era, season 1 to season 12, made Nafford the big station. Also, surprisingly, Vickerstown was in the railway series, but never in the model series. And then only in The Great Race, a CGI movie, that's when they reintroduced Vickerstown. Meanwhile, Thomas's front was fixed, and when Thomas had left the works, it was now going to do some shunting in the yards. Just before Thomas could go shunting, he saw the station master on the platform. What's the matter? Said Thomas. James had an accident at the harbor with your freight train. He needs some help. Bother those cars. I hope poor James isn't hurt. Thomas reversed out of the station and went to turn around on the turntable. He was very annoyed with the freight cars. First thing Thomas had to do was head to the dock, the harbor, then he would have to take the not damaged cars away. Then Thomas would have to get the breakdown train and lift James out of the water. Thomas to the rescue! Let me retry that. Thomas to the rescue. There we go. The first attempt I was meant to blow the whistle after I said Thomas to the rescue, but the whistle didn't work, so I had to do a second attempt. Thomas raced through Nafford very fast. Thomas raced down the line towards the harbor. Thomas remembered how long the journey was to the harbor when he was pulling the mail train for Henry in a different Stories of Sodor episode. If you remember that episode, then you know what I'm talking about. But if you don't know, go check out my playlist of the Stories of Sodor. Then you'll know. Thomas raced down the hill, went through the junction area, past the mine where he fell in yesterday. Thomas rounded a very sharp bend and was now continuing on his way to the harbor. Soon, Thomas was surely almost at the harbor. Thomas went under the two bridges, one on the branch line and one for the main. And then he went under two more bridges. Soon he saw James's accident. Thomas buffered up to the brake van. Thomas was taking the non-derailed freight cars towards a siding so he could come back with the breakdown train for James. Thomas, he said, "Bother you cars derailing James like that. He didn't even mean to bump you that hard. He was just grumpy because he had to take my freight train. Now you derailed him." The troublesome trucks felt very bad and said sorry to Thomas. Thomas said, "You better be sorry, because if you do something like that again, I'm not going to be very happy with you." because Thomas had stopped on a hill, he had to go down and try to pull the rest of the freight cars back up. He had to go all the way up on the hill so the signalman could switch the points towards the lead mines. It took a while to get to the top of the hill, but Thomas managed to do it, and took all the rest of the freight cars at the top of the hill. It was just hard to stop. Don't even know why puffing noises are even happening when I'm literally stopping the train. Now, time to go switch the points. Ta-ting! Now, this part was risky because the rest of the freight cars could possibly derail. Unless if Thomas went at a very slow speed. So Thomas was going to be careful. Oh. Have to go change more points because... Oh. Well, good to note that the points are actually switched because we don't want those freight cars ramming into the mine and being recovered from the mine. That would just take a long time. And I just bumped into a plant. Oh. Thomas was now ready. He decided to let the freight cars pull him down the hill, and then Thomas would reverse to slow down the speed of the cars, just in case if they do derail. And that strategy was working. Thomas and the non-derailed cars had made it to the bottom of the hill. Now, Thomas would shunt them into their sidings. Thomas would take these cars back to the harbor later so they could be unloaded. Thomas realized he was not even shunting the freight cars towards a proper siding. He was just shunting the cars towards a tunnel. After Thomas did that, he went to go get the breakdown train. Since it has been a while since I made a video of this game actually got an update where it actually has the full breakdown crane, because in the older versions of this game, it only had the breakdown crane van. Well, that's a horrifying sight. There we go. I hope I can actually, actually operate the crane, because if not, well, then, well, yeah. There's the breakdown train van. Which, why is the breakdown train van a van? In the show, it was a works unit coach. Oh well. Anyways, Thomas had collected the breakdown train. It was now off. To go get James. I have to go switch the points. There we go. Thomas set off with the breakdown train to go help James. Sing along, sing. Thomas was able to move faster with the breakdown train because there was not a lot of cars, unlike that long, heavy freight train. So he was able to arrive at the harbor much more quicker. He was soon now at the accident of James. I don't actually think this might actually work. Well, let's give it a shot. Oh. I can operate the crane. I just do not know if I can operate the hook. Okay, there we go. Got our crane controls. Well, I gotta get rid of it, so, yeah. Had to quickly delete the van. Well, to get this to work, we gotta be much closer to James, of course. Unfortunately, we won't be able to actually, put his tender on the flatbed, so, yeah. Now, just gotta be careful not to, derail the breakdown train. Otherwise, I'll have to get a new one. Anyways, yeah. Alrighty. Attach winch. Okay, we're attached. Uh-oh. Oh no. Well, what the? Thomas! What? Well, I see what I did wrong. I forgot to anchor down the crane. Oh yeah, because this game also got an update, we have new trains. Leg. Okay. Rescuing James out of the water. Take number 2. Just quickly looping around. Oh. Okay, we're attached. Rotating. Crane. Okay, there we go. Now we just gotta figure out how to get our crane menu again. But before I do that, might want to lock that. Alright. Now, how do I just get that crane menu? Give me one moment. Okay, got it. Oh. Oh. I could not rotate there, so I had to quickly detach. Right, reattach. Oh my god. James, cooperate! Well, when I was trying to put James back on the tracks, we had a little bit of an incident. Our flat car went somewhere, and Thomas just flew. So yeah, but I made some decent progress. Now maybe. Well, I can't delete the crane because, well, it flew. Well, no, James is just blocking it. Anyways, get new Thomas. Tried to couple up. Oh. Oh no. Oh. Whoops. Oh. Yeah. Hold on. We're getting somewhere. And oh. And this is why I do not operate the breakdown crane in Thomas and Friends Roblox games. Because it's hard to put engines back on the rails. Oh. Well, after a few attempts, finally got James back on the tracks. So Thomas helped James back to the sheds. You know what I've noticed? A lot of the characters in Thomas and Friends have the Thomas coupling rod. Like Thomas has it. I'm talking about this long white part. Like Thomas has it. James has it. Edward sorta has it, but it's a little smaller. Duck has it. Donald Douglas has it. Oliver has it. Diesel, Harry Burt, Splatter Dodge, Paxton, Sydney, they all have it. Charlie, Stanley, Ryan, like, lots of characters have this Thomas-shaped coupling rod. Anyways, the two engines race down the line towards the sheds. The two engines passed Knapford. And went past Edward and Henry. Edward, who was still asleep. Because there was not enough room at the sheds, Henry was asleep with Edward at Knapford Junction, while Thomas and James were puffing home towards the sheds. The sun was slowly setting as the two engines approached Tidmouth. By the time the two engines approached home, it was already night. Uh-oh. Both Thomas and James puffed into the shed and were just chatting to each other. Percy and Toby chuffed in. Percy and Toby congratulated Thomas of his rescue, but they realized there was not enough room in the sheds for all the engines, so Thomas had an idea where they could just reverse to the end of the shed to let the other engines in. James, Percy, and Toby agreed with that idea. and the four of the three of them reversed into the shed. Toby hit the buffers a little more harder. Toby hit the buffers harder than the other engine, so he moved forwards a little bit. Then Gordon puffed into the shed after a long day of pulling the express. Then Ginty, a real-life train from British Railways, came after working on his branch line for a long day. Then Donald came in. Then Douglas rolled in. The two twins told the other engines about their adventure today. Then Duck came. He was just about to tell all the other engines about his adventure when Daisy, the diesel rail car, came. And without the other engines knowing, Edward actually came back to the sheds because he saw there was a bit more room. Along with Henry, who also came back into the sheds. So, here is all the trains in-game in the same shed. So, after a long day's work, all the engines went to sleep. Before Thomas and James fell asleep, they both said goodnight to each other and fell asleep. Oh. Oopsie. Sir Topham Hatt was wondering who was going to take Thomas's freight train. But that's a story for another day.